Hello and welcome to day number 14 of the HUBZone Small Business Summit. We have a great presentation for you today from Jennifer Sokol from GWACs IQ. And I apologize, I am going on 2 hours of sleep, I believe. And I know she just told me her title, so I will allow her to jump in. Can you remind me one more time what your title was?
Oh, of course, Michelle. I am a senior manager of research with Deltek's Information Solutions supporting GWACs IQ Federal.
Wow, she did that way better than me. I should have let her do that. So I'm actually personally very excited about today's presentation. I constantly am always monitoring these trends and, tend to use them. I do give GWACs a lot of credit when I use your presentations, but this information tends to be liquid gold. So you guys are all in a great treat for today. And again, I apologize. I apparently can't even speak this morning. A lot has been going on. I wanted to remind everybody this presentation will be recorded. However, Jennifer does have a very, very busy schedule. So we might not be able to get to all the questions, but as a person that has seen the slides, I'm sure that she has covered a lot of what you're already going to have questions for.
Yeah.
So, but unfortunately, if you do have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. We do have a Q&A function, but if for any reason that we can't get to them, I will compile those questions and supply them to Jennifer after the fact. Again, because of the fact that I know we have a lot of really great information, I'm going to stop talking right now and pass it over to Jennifer so we can really get started with this. With that said, take it away.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining me today. Really, Michelle, I appreciate you and the HUBZone Council reaching out and allowing me to share information with your audience. As I mentioned, my name is Jennifer Sokol. I'm a senior manager with Deltek Information Solutions for the federal GWACs IQ product. And this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at the current state of federal spending as a whole. And then what we're going to do is we'll talk about federal spending with HUBZone primes as a component of the overall picture. And what's going to shake out of that are top industries for HUBZone spending. So we'll dig in there and talk about what the fiscal year 22 budget request looks like in those top industries and who the top spenders are, as well as with whom they're spending their money. And then we'll also provide, go through a few of the top opportunities that I was able to pull out that may be of interest to some of you for building out your pipeline. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with where we are now. So I have to tell you that fiscal year 20 was yet another record year in terms of contract spending. Spending totaled around $666 billion, which was a $76 billion increase from fiscal year 19. Both civilian and defense agencies saw an increase in fiscal year 20 versus the previous fiscal year. And what's interesting about that is understanding how COVID impacted the two sectors. So in the civilian agencies, overall spending year over year has increased for the last 8 fiscal years. Historically, there haven't been huge increases. Rather, they've been around 2 to 3% each year. But 2020 was different, where we saw a 19% increase in civilian spending. Now, of course, part of this was due to the increase in discretionary appropriations for fiscal year 20, but civilian agencies saw more of that increase as a result of COVID spending, which ended up being an additional $27 billion in fiscal year 20. For defense agencies, we see that since fiscal year 16, their increases year over year are more pronounced than what we would have seen in civilian. DoD increased 10% from fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 20, which is less than what we saw on the civilian side, but still significant. And in contrast to the civilian agencies, most of the increase for the defense agencies was due to increases in appropriations versus COVID spending. So a good rule of thumb when the budget is approved and contractors are trying to determine what this means for them is that typically 50% of the DoD's budget is spent on government contracting. For civilian agencies, it really depends on the agency. So some agencies like NASA and Energy average around 90% of their budgets going to contracting versus agency like Education and HUD that spend less than 10% typically. In recent years, contract spend as a percentage of the discretionary budget has been around 39 to 42%. This percentage dropped somewhat in fiscal year 20 because, of course, we saw unprecedented legislation putting trillions into government response for COVID-19 efforts. And that really drove the significant spike in discretionary spend for fiscal year 2020. It also drove a significant increase in contracting, but due to the investments being in areas other than federal contracting, like in the area of state and local grants, as well as loans, it pushed the percentage of discretionary spending on federal contracting to a low of 35%. So while this may look a little ominous, remember that the contract spend actually increased in fiscal year 20. So in that sense, this slide is a little misleading. So I'd like to talk a little bit about small business goaling and achievement. And I'm sure that this audience is more than familiar with the federal small business goaling percentages: 23% for small businesses, 5% for women-owned small business and small disadvantaged business, and 3% for both service-disabled veteran-owned business and HUBZone. So as this slide illustrates, the general trend over the past 5 fiscal years is of achievement. With the exception of HUBZone. However, the positive takeaway is that the government-wide HUBZone goaling achievement has increased each year and is so close to being achieved. In fiscal year 20, the reported HUBZone achievement was 2.44% for small business eligible contracts, including the double counting of awards in disaster areas and to Puerto Rico and other territories. When the double counting is excluded, the achievement is reduced slightly to 2.39%. It is worth noting that the HUBZone government-wide subcontracting goal is also 3%, and that has yet to be achieved as well, peaking with an achievement in fiscal year 20 at 1.65%. So as many of you are aware, there is continued interest from Congress in the HUBZone program because the 3% goal has not yet been met. And unlike the other categories where the goals have been achieved either consistently or on and off over the last several years. With changes made to the program, including the opportunity for governors to annually petition the Small Business Administration to grant HUBZone eligibility to designated covered areas, the introduction of qualified disaster areas, and the recent HUBZone map freeze extension from the end of this year to June 30th of 2023, it is expected that the number of HUBZone small businesses that are available to bid on federal contracts will increase, and that there will be more contracts being awarded to HUBZone businesses. So it makes sense to be aware of which departments are spending the most money with HUBZone prime vendors. And it's encouraging to see that in most departments, the spending with HUBZones has increased. So while the Defense Department and the military branches, along with the VA and HHS, are among the top 10 spending departments with HUBZone primes, the DoD as a whole and the VA and Health and Human Services did not meet the 3% goal for fiscal year 20. Of the top 10 spending departments shown on the slide, Commerce had the highest level of HUBZone goaling achievement percentage in fiscal year 2020 with 12.8%, followed by Agriculture with 7.3%, and the State Department with 6.9%. And when evaluating the market as a whole, we do take a look to see who is spending and in which markets. And so as you can see, These top three market segments have been the dominant markets for HUBZone prime vendors, with AEC, or architecture, engineering, and construction, consistently in the top spot. The market share has shifted somewhat, where AEC represented 34% of the HUBZone prime spend in fiscal year 2016, decreasing to 29% in fiscal year 20. IT has held steady at 23% of the spend for the past 3 fiscal years, while professional services has increased from 18% to 22% since fiscal year 2016. In fact, professional services spending with HUBZone primes in fiscal year 20 was double what was reported in fiscal year 16. So what I'd like to do next is to focus on the top 3 industries. So we'll look at specific contracting trends, what we're seeing in the president's budget request as associated with the market, and then highlight a few opportunities we see on the horizon that may be of interest to those of you who are working in the architecture, engineering, and construction market, information technology, or professional services. So what we'll do is we'll start with the number 1 market, which is architecture, engineering, and construction. And as mentioned a couple slides ago, AEC continues to be the top industry for HUBZone primes, and the majority of the top spending departments saw increases in AEC spending. In fiscal year 20, the Army accounted for more than a third of all AEC spending with HUBZone primes, while the remaining top departments shown on this slide, when combined, accounted for about 50% of the AEC spending in fiscal year 20. Of the top NAICS, 236220 represents more than half of the reported AEC HUBZone prime spend in fiscal year 20, or about $1.87 billion. Only 3 of the top 10 contractors for AEC in fiscal year 20 have a singular customer. The rest are quite diversified. As an example, Pontchartrain's AEC customers are both defense and civilian and include the Army Corps of Engineers, NAVFAC, NASA, Air Force, and the USDA. Of the companies that had only one customer, their work was with that one customer, but under multiple contracts. So before we talk budget, Michelle referenced that she utilizes a lot of our reports, our blogs, and things of that nature. And so I'd love to take credit for you that I can't. I really need to give credit where it's due. And that goes with Deltek's incredible federal market analysis team, who compiles the budget numbers and conducts the analysis and hosts the webinars and writes the reports. They're just fantastic. So if you're looking for more of a deep dive into any type of budgetary information, the impact of executive orders, things of that nature, I'd really encourage you to download some of their reports or attend the webinars that they host. So moving into the AEC budget for fiscal year 22, the president has requested $45.3 billion for AEC related activities for fiscal year 2022. That represents about a 5% decrease over fiscal year 2021. This decline would be significantly mitigated with the passage of an infrastructure bill, which is currently in negotiations. The majority of the federal AEC expenditures are dedicated to the cost of major construction, which represents roughly 65% of total AEC spending. The top 10 departments represent 93% of total budget requests for AEC services, with the Department of Defense alone accounting for 37%. The Department of Defense is planning for about a 25% drop in AEC-related funding, which would impact all components, but primarily the Air Force. The reductions impact major construction initiatives across DoD. The Army Corps of Engineers requests a considerable 44% increase for AEC activities in fiscal year 2022. Funding and priorities include increasing infrastructure and ecosystem resilience to climate change and for new construction starts. The Veterans Affairs fiscal year 22 budget request includes new AEC-related funding for Veterans Medical Care and Health Fund, which was established in the American Rescue Plan. The VA plans to use a portion of the funding for medical facilities. And the Department of Interior is requesting more than a 60% increase for AEC-related budget items. One of the main benefactors of this planned increase is the Bureau of Reclamation, which would receive an additional $500 million for water infrastructure projects. The Department of Homeland Security proposes a modest budget increase for AEC activities in fiscal year 2022. The largest increase would be for the Customs and Border Protection for construction and facility improvements, including construction and modernization of field offices, port offices, and ports of entry. So a few things to keep in mind as it relates to the AEC market. President Biden's proposed infrastructure plan, if passed, would funnel billions of additional funds into some federal agencies to address long-standing and new infrastructure needs. The Biden administration has also ordered revisions to current Buy American regulations in order to boost procurement of domestic products, including building materials and supplies. And one other thing to take into consideration, or just kind of have in the back of your head moving forward, is that if remote working levels that were spurred by COVID and not being able to go into offices and things of that nature, if those things stay in place, agencies' property needs may decline or shift from new construction to restoration and or modernization of current facilities, including efforts to increase climate resilience of federal buildings. So now that we know kind of where we've been and what we're thinking the market will look like in the future, let's take a look at some of the opportunities for HUBZone primes in the federal AEC market. So I'd like to share my approach with you in pulling together this little mini pipeline because every company will build a pipeline differently, and there really is no right way to do so. So of course, I used GovWin IQ. I focused on opportunities being released in the next 28 months. This was to account for the rest of the calendar year for 2021, as well as looking into calendar years 2022 and 2023. I limited search results based on, competition type, industry, anticipated value, etc. So what you're seeing here is a list of the top opportunities based on my approach. I'd like, if anyone who is participating or listening to the recorded version of the call, to keep in mind that if you're a GovWin client, your client success manager can help you build searches using various techniques to really help you create a robust pipeline. All right. So the first opportunity on the list is an anticipated recompete or follow-on IDIQ for the Homeland Security RMAC vehicle. It is anticipated that the contracts will be available on a non-mandatory enterprise-wide basis to all DHS directorates and components, and that the scope of work will include, real property repairs, maintenance and general construction, marine construction, demolition, historical restoration, and remediation. Design build, one-step turnkey, and design bid build project delivery methods will be used. On the current contract, roughly 11% of the $421 million total reported spend for all of the contracts in place has been with HUBZone Prime. So again, roughly 11% of the reported spend has been with HUBZone Primes. What's of interest is that as you're looking at the anticipated solicitation date, the current contracts that are in place have staggering expiration dates in 2025 and 2026, and that's based on their award dates. So based on the earliest contract expiration, Deltek anticipates follow-on activity to begin in the third quarter of fiscal 22, and that's based on the basic procurement timeline associated with the current contract award. Next on the list is the Fort Campbell MATOC, and it's an anticipated recompete. The incumbent contracts are expected to expire in March of 2023, so we'd expect to see a solicitation in the summer of next year. The current contracts have been used to execute a broad range of maintenance, repair, and minor construction projects on real property at Fort Campbell. There are currently 7 incumbents, and there has been about $121 million in reported spending to date on these contracts since fiscal year 18. The Army Corps of Engineers, Fort Worth District Engineering and Construction Support Office, or EXO, may have a requirement for vertical construction services, multiple award task order contracts, or MATOCs, primarily in support of the Department of Homeland Security programs. We are seeing or anticipating a ceiling of $150 million for this particular program. The types of projects anticipated to be completed under the resulting contracts include construction or repair of things like the Border Patrol stations, K-9 facilities, firing ranges, training facilities, etc. Deltek understands this to be a new requirement with no existing incumbents. For the Army Corps of Engineers Vertical Construction HUBZone Southwestern region, the government has stated that an award is anticipated for Q1 fiscal 22. So the September 21 date is an estimate. It may push just a little bit, could slip. This MATOC will be administered by the Fort Worth District for a total period of up to 5 years. The ceiling value on this one is coming in right under $115 million. And the overall construction program will include things like dormitories, dining facilities, office space, the vehicle maintenance shops, etc. They anticipate utilizing design build and design bid build processes. So the scope of work includes new construction in addition to maintenance, repairs, and alterations. So again, Deltek understands this to be a new requirement with no incumbent contracts. So what we're going to do now, after I take a sip of water, is we're going to shift and take a look at the IT market. Let me change my slide. And as the slides show, for the top departments spending IT dollars with HUBZone primes, the spending has either been stable or has dramatically increased over the past couple of years. Total reported spend increased from $1.5 billion in fiscal year 16 to $2.8 billion in fiscal year 20. It is worth noting that Tier 2 and best-in-class or BIC contracts are becoming more important in the federal procurement landscape, and IT spending with HUBZone primes on contract vehicles like SUP 5 and T4NG grew, with compound annual growth rates or CAGRs of 28 and 88% respectively. SUP is by far the most utilized contract vehicle for IT and HUBZones, representing about 29% of the total IT HUBZone spend, or $730 million. For the majority of the top contractors within the IT market, the BICs and Tier 2 vehicles represent a large part of their IT business portfolio, and most of the top 10 also have diversified federal customers comprised of both defense and civilian agencies. So we'll talk a little bit about IT budget. The total IT budget request for fiscal year 2022 is $95.7 billion, which is an increase of about 4% versus the 2021 request. The defense total is $38.6 billion and the civilian side is $58.4 billion. Now, the IT budget request focuses on securing data and systems, of course, delivering citizen services and furthering the vision of digital government. The IT budget has themes and it really promotes reducing cybersecurity risk. It is championing laws to enable technology planning, oversight, funding, and accountability. It is requesting funds that help with the strategic use of IT to enable its missions. There is an emphasis on modernizing legacy systems and, of course, migrating to commercial cloud solutions and shared services. In addition, it's worth noting that there is a fair amount of language in the budget request that in regards to recruiting, retaining, and reskilling the federal technology workforce. So what does that mean for you? Things to kind of watch out for are to look at Congress to steer funding towards high priority areas of IT modernization and research and development for cybersecurity, big data and analytics, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. One thing that we are quite certain about is that contractors can anticipate a much higher scrutiny of your systems, so you need to ensure that your company's cybersecurity posture is aligned with emerging requirements. You may want to consider offering training services for emerging technology areas such as cloud computing, advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity to address the growing government needs. And you'll see this echoed on the professional services section of the presentation as well. We're recommending that companies consider targeting areas where the pandemic revealed challenges or capability gaps, such as siloed data, interoperability issues, legacy system access, data curation and standardization, and cybersecurity weaknesses. The federal use of artificial intelligence, or AI, machine learning, and robotic process automation is expanding across mission functions. Some of those are prompted by needs emerging from COVID-19 response. Vendors who work in this area really need to stay abreast of evolving agency needs and mission gaps to offer these cutting-edge type solutions. We are recommending to all of our clients to read solicitations very carefully for new cyber, supply chain, and potentially Buy American contract clauses. So just be aware that things may be changing and you want to ensure your own compliance. And then, of course, anticipate the growth in the number of federal IT procurements that will transition to GSA classified best-in-class contract in the years to come. So for the IT opportunities that are out there, judging from this list, I would bet that many of you on the call are probably, maybe, in the thick of preparing for the release of the Polaris Small Business GWAC, or Government-Wide Acquisition Contract. This is the replacement of the Alliance Small Business 2. The Polaris GWAC is anticipated to be released no earlier than fall of 2021, so it's imminent, it's out there. We anticipate approximately 60 to 100 awards to be made within each pool, so that should total somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 awards. Deltek estimates that the ceiling value will be similar to Alliant 2 Small Business, although that hasn't been published just yet. The Alliant 2 Small Business ceiling was $15 billion, so it should be probably somewhere in that neighborhood. Polaris is of particular interest to HUBZone small businesses because the government made a deliberate decision to restrict the competition type to HUBZone, women-owned, and small businesses because 8A companies have the STARS family of GWACs, and service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses have the VETS family of GWACs. So keep in mind that GWACs are identified as best-in-class or BIC contracts, as referenced in the previous slide, as being used more frequently in the future. Similarly, albeit a little farther out in terms of procurement timeline, the next iteration of SOUP 6's procurement activity may begin in the fiscal year 2023 timeframe. However, this is still speculative and subject to change, as announcements are released by the contracting office once they've determined that they are ready to move forward. It's interesting to see that the incumbent SOUP 5 contracts are active. They're scheduled to expire at the end of April of 2025, and spending has really increased on these contracts. In fact, federal agencies spent more than $7.9 billion through these contracts in fiscal year 20 alone. This is an increase of $2.3 billion or 41% compared to fiscal year 19. This continues the trend of increased spending through SOUP 5 over the past several years, with annual totals more than doubling since fiscal year 2017. It's a very popular contract vehicle to use. Remember that almost 30% of IT HUBZone small business prime spending was done in fiscal year 20 via the current iteration of SOUP. So I think that this could be really important in your business portfolio moving forward if you work in the IT market. So a couple other opportunities that are in the pipeline just to share with you. The Department of State Bureau for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, or INL, may have a continuing requirement for support services to aid the organization in providing information technology and information assurance efforts. The current contract provides for information management support, enterprise-wide web-based reporting systems, full lifecycle management of information systems to include unclassified communications, data processing, and computer systems. So while the contracting office stated that a follow-on effort for this requirement has not been identified to date, the incumbent contract held by T-Symmetry Inc. is active and set to expire in June of 2025 if all option years are exercised. So Deltek anticipates that a follow-on acquisition will take place, of course, prior to the expiration of that current contract, sometime in summer of 2023. Current reported spending is approximately $150 million since fiscal year 2015. Now, the final opportunity listed for the cloud services BOA is part of the Platform One BOA onboarding that is expected this fall out of the Air Force. Now, one thing to keep in mind, might be a little bit more of a squishy, a soft opportunity in that we're not sure if the onboarding is going to apply to all the BOAs. That has not yet been specified by the contracting offices. So just keep that in mind if you're reviewing this as a potential opportunity. It's also worth noting that reported spending, even though it's 95 million listed here as the estimated value, has been relatively low at 4.6 million. So that's something you may want to consider as well. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and jump to professional services. And as you can see on the slide, When looking at the professional services spending trends for HUBZone primes, it looks good in that the reported spend doubled from fiscal year 16 to fiscal year 20. But when you look at commerce, the spend is a little bit of an aberration in that it is spending on one contract with one vendor, primarily T-Rex, for a total of $524 million in fiscal year 20. And that represents almost 20% of all federal professional services spend with HUBZone primes in fiscal year 20, and nearly 90% of the commerce fiscal year 20 professional services spend. So I think when you're looking at the trends, you take commerce and you kind of set it aside a little bit, and then you look at the remaining departments. And as you can see, the growth in spending in the top remaining departments is pretty good. Not shown on the slide, but worth noting is that Health and Human Services has increased its professional services spending with HUBZone primes and reported $189 million in fiscal year 2020, which was a 110% increase over the total reported for fiscal year 16. So definite growth there as well. And as for the top vendors, they too saw remarkable growth in their professional services obligations when looking over the fiscal year 16 through 20 timeframe. Many of those have had double, triple, and even quadruple digit increases from what was reported in fiscal year 16. And again, the top contractors, with the exception of T-Rex, all have diversified customer bases. So a theme there, if you will. So let's go ahead and take a look at the budget for professional services. The president is requesting over $70 billion for professional services for fiscal year 2022, and that represents a 2% decrease over the fiscal year 2021 enacted budget. Management consulting services really dominate the professional services market. It's worth noting that this segment may include, but not specify, work supporting other professional services like finance, human resources, and marketing. As for the departments that are spending with HUBZone primes, the Department of Defense budget request is relatively flat compared to fiscal year 2021. This is largely due to budget stability within the operations and maintenance, or O&M, and the RDT&E budgets, or research, development, test, and evaluation budgets across all of the defense components. So it's stable. The 5.4% increase in the Homeland Security budget request reflects the importance and prioritization of professional services support for CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. DHS has also requested additional funding for professional services for TSA and Citizen and Immigration Services. When you look at the Health and Human Services professional budget request, there's a big decline, but that's primarily due to a major cut to the Public Health and Social Services Emergency Fund. That fund houses a significant amount of COVID relief funding, so the decline there is highly concentrated and targeted. So again, discounting that fund, sort of putting it aside, HHS does plan for increases in professional services support for the Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and the Administration for Children and Families. And then Department of State's request for an additional $109 million above fiscal year 2021 is driven by its work supporting diplomatic and consular programs. So what are some things to watch in the professional services market? What do we learn from the budget request? As mentioned before, the Biden administration has prioritized workforce development to build in-house capabilities and expertise in a number of areas, like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and program management. So look for increased training and consulting opportunities. Additionally, we may see more need for program support because President Biden's management agenda includes several new organizations, functions, and processes that may not be entirely addressable in-house. So they may be looking to outsource some of that support. So look for opportunities to support expanding agency requirements driven by those administration objectives. So the professional services pipeline for HUBZone primes is not filled with high dollar value opportunity ops. And although the top of the list is an anticipated recompete follow-on for a well-utilized contract for management and administrative support to multiple bureaus within the Department of State Bureau of Diplomatic Security. The current incumbent, McManus Associates, contract expires in August of 2022. So Deltek anticipates that a solicitation could be issued in early 2022. While the ceiling value of the incumbent contract is more than $200 million, the reported spending is at about $52 million to date. So that's something to take into consideration if you were interested in this opportunities. Now, the Army's SEC HQ support and the Apex opportunities are both anticipated recompetes or follow-ons that, again, might be a little soft at this point, but we're tracking those to see if they will result in a procurement. But in contrast, the DISA Communication Infrastructure Design Program has been forecast by the agency to be released as a task order in the second quarter of fiscal year 2022, with an award in the first quarter of fiscal year 2023. The current incumbent, who is MSM Technology, is completing the work via a task order that was issued under Schedule 70, which is now the GSA multi-award schedule, or GSA Mass. Similarly, the next opportunity for the DISA Federated Services is forecast by the agency to be competed as a task order in the first quarter of fiscal year 2022, with an award in the third quarter of fiscal 22. The current incumbent, Akira Technologies, is also completing the work via a task order under the that was awarded under Schedule 70, now the GSA Mass. So one thing that I do want to call your attention to at the bottom of the list is the BIC MAC. So this is planned to be the replacement of the current OASIS programs. I've mentioned a couple of times this morning the importance of the best-in-class or BIC contracts in the future of federal procurement. So it may be worthwhile to explore this program as it unfolds, whether as a prime or as a sub. The draft RFP is anticipated to be released sometime next month, and GSA plans to release multiple drafts throughout fiscal year 2022. A solicitation is estimated to be released in the first quarter of fiscal year 23, with awards anticipated to be made at the end of fiscal year 2023. So again, a lot of work will be going into this, the development of it over the next year. Definitely one to keep your eye on. So as we come to a close of fiscal year 2021, which I can't believe we are almost there, there are some things to keep in mind as you're planning your business development strategy for the upcoming years. Via legislation and through its budget requests, the administration has demonstrated that small business growth is a priority. Please continue to watch for opportunities driven by those administration objectives and the congressional interest in the HUBZone goaling percentage of 3% not being achieved. It's highly unlikely that the Congress and the Biden administration will enact significant budget cuts to offset the unprecedented COVID-19 spending until the economy has stabilized somewhat. So we're anticipating a stable budget for now. In fact, we think that growth in federal contracting for the next 2 years is actually very likely. And we have some more details on that, not to plug, but in a report that our FMA, our Federal Markets Analysis team, has published for fiscal year 22, the budget request priorities and opportunities. Lots of additional details there, but in summary, the budget the request is driven by generous increases across the majority of federal agencies, with an expected 14.5% increase in budget for civilian agencies. The full budget request outline reflects the Biden administration's strategy for funding key priority areas, including climate change, healthcare, equity in business, research and development, and information technology. Now, as shown in the spending trends that we saw this morning, for HUBZone companies like yours, the key to success is a diverse customer base and the ability to compete for work on different contract vehicles. Do not underestimate the importance of the best-in-class and Tier 2 contracts moving forward. It's important to continuously nurture your BD pipeline to assess opportunities to grow your business as a prime, a sub, or both. The small list of opportunities that I shared today is certainly not the end-all be-all list, and I encourage those of you who are GovWinIQ clients to contact your CSM to assist you with building searches to help feed that pipeline. And for those of you who may be interested in more opportunities, we offer additional insights into the top opportunities that are anticipated for fiscal year 22. This is a really popular series within the market. We invite you to attend any or all of our Top Op Series webinars. They start in October, and these are free to you. And you don't have to be a GovWinIQ customer to attend. So I'll hope you take that into consideration and hear from our other analysts and managers about some of those top ops that we anticipate. So I really do thank you very much for your time and attention this morning. I apologize for having to scoot to my next meeting, but I do appreciate your attention, and I wish all of you much success and good health as we close out the calendar year 2021. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was amazing, Jennifer. And I'm really glad that was recorded. So I know you have another meeting, but you can close us out. But again, thank you for all this liquid gold, because once this recording is available, I know a lot of people are going to be like, where's that at again? So again, appreciate it. And tune in, everybody. We do have another session at 10:30. We had another great speaker, but it's going to be really hard to follow this lady.
Oh, thanks so much, Michelle. I appreciate it. Take care.
No problem. Have a good day.
You too.